Welcome back, my friend. I'm so happy you're here today. Take a comfortable position, relax, and let's begin this journey together. Right now, more than 5 billion people around the world carry a small device with them wherever they go. With it, you can talk to someone on the other side of the planet. You can hear a voice from thousands of miles away as clearly as if that person were standing right next to you. But just 150 years ago, this was impossible. If you wanted to talk to someone far away, you had to travel for days or write a letter and wait. Distance meant silence. Today, we are going to discover how one invention changed everything. This is the story of the telephone. This is not just a story about wires and machines. This is a story about connection, about human voices traveling through impossible distances, and about how the world became smaller. So take a slow breath and let this story carry you back in time. Imagine the world in the year 1870. Picture a small town. Dirt roads stretch between houses made of wood and stone. At night, only candles flicker in windows. No electric lights, no engines. Everything quiet, slow, and distant. If you lived in this town and your sister lived just 50 miles away, you might not hear her voice for an entire year. You could write a letter and send it on its long journey, and then you would wait days, weeks. When important news came, it came slowly. A baby was born. A loved one was sick. But by the time the letter reached you, everything might have already changed. People lived with silence between them. Distance meant separation not just of bodies, but of voices, of laughter, of comfort. Around this time, something new appeared, the telegraph. This machine could send messages through wires using electricity, but there was one deep limitation: you could not hear a voice. Just dots and dashes. And so, many inventors began to dream the same dream. If electricity can carry signals through a wire, can it carry the human voice itself? This question changed everything. In a small workshop in Boston, Massachusetts, there was a young man who worked late into the night. His name was Alexander Graham Bell. Candles burned low on his desk. Strange wires hung from the ceiling. Bell was born in Scotland, and his family moved to Canada when he was young. But Bell carried something with him from his childhood, something that shaped everything he would become. His mother was almost completely deaf. As a boy, Bell would press his lips close to her forehead and speak in low tones. The vibrations would travel through her skull, and somehow she could understand him. This is how he learned that sound is not just something we hear. Sound is movement. Sound is vibration. His father devoted his life to helping deaf people learn to speak. Young Bell grew up watching his father turn invisible sounds into visible shapes. Because of this, Bell spent his entire life thinking about one question: how do we carry the human voice from one person to another? He became a teacher. He worked with deaf students. But at the same time, he had another dream. He wanted to invent a machine that could carry the human voice across long distances. Many people told him it was impossible. But Bell kept working. He believed there was a way. He had a young assistant named Thomas Watson. Watson was skilled with tools and machines. Together, they experimented for months. They tried many different designs. They failed again and again. Bell's neighbors complained about the strange sounds coming from his workshop late at night. Buzzing, humming, Bell's voice shouting through walls. They thought he was crazy. But Bell did not care. He could hear something they could not. He could hear the future. On the 10th of March, 1876, something extraordinary happened. Bell was in one room, and Watson was in another room down the hall. They were testing a new version of their machine. Bell was adjusting some chemicals when he accidentally spilled acid on his clothes. The acid burned him, and without thinking, he called out loudly, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." And in the other room, Watson heard something incredible. Through the machine, through the wire, he heard Bell's voice. It was not perfectly clear, but it was recognizable. A human voice traveling through electricity. Watson ran into the room, his heart pounding, excited and amazed. They had done it. For the first time in history, a voice had been sent through a wire and heard in another place. In that small workshop, the future had just been born. That moment changed the world forever. Of course, one successful test was not enough. Bell needed to prove his invention could work reliably. A few months later, there was a great exhibition in Philadelphia. People came from all over the world to see new inventions. Bell brought his telephone. At first, not many people paid attention. It was just a strange device with wires. But then something happened. The Emperor of Brazil, Dom Pedro II, was visiting. He stopped at Bell's display and agreed to test it. Bell went to one end of the room and spoke into the device. The Emperor held the receiver to his ear, and suddenly his eyes went wide. "My God, it talks," he said. Dom Pedro was so amazed that he spent 2 hours testing the telephone that day. News of his reaction spread quickly. After that moment, everyone wanted to see the telephone. Newspapers wrote about it. Scientists studied it. The world began to understand that something revolutionary had just been born. In 1877, the first telephone line was installed. It connected a business office to a home just a few miles away. Soon, people realized something important. If 2 people could be connected, why not 10? Why not a whole city? This created a new challenge. How do you connect thousands of people? You cannot run a wire from every house to every other house. The solution was the telephone exchange. This was a central office where all the lines came together. When you wanted to call someone, an operator would answer. "Number, please," the operator would say. You would tell them the number, and the operator would physically connect your wire to the other person's wire. It was done by hand, one connection at a time. Picture this: rows of young women sitting in front of giant switchboards, pulling cables, plugging wires. These operators worked long hours, connecting hundreds of calls every day. And they knew everyone's business. They heard marriage proposals. They heard bad news. They were the invisible thread connecting the entire city. By the 1880s, telephone lines were spreading across cities in America and Europe. Rich families installed telephones in their homes. Businesses used them to communicate quickly. Doctors could be reached in emergencies. But the early telephones were not perfect. The sound quality was often poor. You had to speak very loudly. Sometimes the connection would fail. Still, people loved it. For the first time in human history, you could hear someone's voice without being in the same room. The telephone was no longer just an invention. It was becoming a necessity. For many years, telephone calls could only travel short distances. The electrical signal would get weaker as it traveled. After a certain distance, the voice would fade away. Engineers developed amplifiers to boost the signal and send it farther. They improved the wires. They built stronger systems. In 1915, something amazing happened. The first transcontinental telephone line was completed. For the first time, someone in New York could call someone in San Francisco nearly 3,000 miles away. To celebrate, Alexander Graham Bell made a ceremonial call to his old assistant, Thomas Watson. It had been almost 40 years since that first call. "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you," Bell said, repeating his famous words. Watson replied with a smile, "It would take me a week to get there now." The world was getting smaller. Voices were traveling farther than ever before. Through the early 1900s, telephones slowly became more common in ordinary homes. At first, they were expensive. A single phone call could cost as much as a worker's daily wage. Only wealthy families could afford them. But as technology improved, prices began to drop. Telephone companies competed to connect more customers. They ran wires through streets, over rooftops, and across fields. Telephone poles became a familiar sight. By the 1950s, most homes in developed countries had a telephone. It was usually placed in a central location, like the hallway or the kitchen. When it rang, everyone could hear it. Answering the phone was an event. Families gathered to take turns talking to relatives. Children were taught telephone manners. "Hello, this is the Smith residence. May I ask who's calling?" The telephone became part of daily life. It was a way to stay connected, to share news, to simply talk. For many decades, you needed an operator to connect your call. But in the 1950s and 60s, a new system appeared, the rotary dial telephone. This phone had a circular dial with numbers from 0 to 9. You put your finger in the hole and rotated the dial. Each rotation sent electrical pulses, telling the system which number you wanted. It was slower than asking an operator, but it gave people independence. And quietly, thousands of telephone operators lost their jobs. The women who once knew everyone's secrets were no longer needed. Later, in the 1980s, the touch-tone phone replaced the rotary dial. You simply pressed buttons. Each button made a different tone. These changes made the telephone faster, easier, and more personal. For over 100 years, telephones were connected to wires. If you wanted to make a call, you had to be near a telephone line. But in the 1980s, something incredible began. Engineers developed a way to send telephone signals through the air using radio waves. You could have a telephone without any wires at all. The first mobile phones were huge and heavy. They looked like bricks. One early model weighed almost 2 pounds and cost nearly $4,000. The battery lasted only 30 minutes of talk time, and calls were expensive. But people loved the freedom. You could make a call from your car. You could call someone while walking down the street. A mother could check on her children from the grocery store. A businessman could close a deal from anywhere. You were no longer tied to one place. Through the 1990s and 2000s, mobile phones became smaller, lighter, and cheaper. By the early 2000s, mobile phones were everywhere. And then, in 2007, the smartphone arrived. Today, when we think of a telephone, we think of a small computer that fits in our hand, a device that connects us to the entire world. Modern smartphones can make calls, send messages, take photos, play music, show videos, and connect to the internet. We use them for work, for learning, for entertainment, and for staying close to the people we love. More than 5 billion people now own a mobile phone. The telephone, which started as a luxury for the rich, has become something almost everyone can access. We can video call someone on the other side of the planet and see their face in real time. We can send our voice, our image, and our thoughts across oceans in an instant. All of this began with one man in a workshop asking a simple question: can we send a voice through a wire? The story of the telephone teaches us something beautiful. It shows us that human connection is powerful. People have always wanted to talk to each other, to share their lives, to hear the voices of the people they care about. Before the telephone, distance meant silence. If someone moved far away, you might never hear their voice again. But now, distance means almost nothing. And this journey, from that first call in 1876 to the billions of phones today, reminds us that great changes often start with small steps. Bell and Watson did not create the smartphone. They simply made it possible to send a voice through a wire, but that one step led to everything that came after. Now, my friend, you are here listening to this story in English, and that is something to celebrate. Every time you listen, every time you understand a new word, you are connecting yourself to millions of people around the world who speak English. Just like the telephone connected the world, your English is connecting you to new opportunities, new ideas, and new friendships. If you enjoyed this story today, I hope you will come back for the next one. Leave a comment below and tell me what you learned, or share which invention you would like to hear about next. Subscribe so you never miss a journey.